Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Laura, for the intro, and thank you, Missouri River Relief and Columbia Parks and Rec for hosting this. This is kind of a dream. Um, I'll talk a little bit more about my relationship with Missouri River Relief, but for now, I'll just say this is awesome to be here talking about this project that of a place and a force that we love so much. So how I see this going is we'll introduce ourselves, give you the background of what is podcasting, and then dive into how we designed this podcast, and then talk about how we went about making the podcast, and finish with questions and answers. Pretty straightforward. And throughout the way, we'll pepper it with sharing the audio, because I assume not everyone has heard Rivertown. Raise your hand if you have heard Rivertown, if you've listened to at least one episode or a few clips. Okay.
That's the most ever of any audience I've ever talked to that's ever listened to the podcast. So congratulations. That's very cool.
Perfect. Okay.
I mean, to any podcast.
Okay. Janet, do you want to say a little more about yourself and your relationship to the Missouri River?
Sure. And I will just say, yes, please ask us questions. Let's make this as interactive as you want. I'm going to give a shout out to Laura and Steve. Thanks for having us as well. And Laura, please time us, because for a radio producer, I usually have a lot of clocks in my face and I have 0 clocks right now. So I'm not going to know what time it is, which is really strange for me. And it's going to go by super fast. So please just give us a sign when we're getting at 40 minutes or so, and we'll bring you all into the discussion. I will also just echo what Tina said about Missouri River Relief and your work here and the Missouri River. You all don't realize this. I think Steve may have heard this, but even some of our producers don't know this. But when you said mornings on the river, Laura, and I know all of the education events you do, KBIA producers have been welcomed, and the media are always welcomed. I know this organization understands the importance of storytelling, and Victoria has been part of that as well. Storytelling about the river and making people hear the stories from the river. And that's what this podcast was about. And our producers going out to the mornings on the river and going out to the river cleanups and just having that access and bringing back audio was what really made me, as a producer sitting in the studio, having that audio come back to me, realize that like this is something we should do so much more of. There, we should go more in depth in this, and we should really hang out with these people. So it's really nice to be here.
Thank you, Janet. And Janet and I got connected, I think, through the New Territory magazine. Well, the School of Journalism. Yes. I was a huge fan of Janet's. Like, she was a lot of my friends' favorite professors, and or like favorite news director to work with at KBIA when I was at the MU School of Journalism. Soon after I graduated, I started first working as a data entry person for the Missouri Stream team. And even during college and well into that early season of my life, I'd been working with Missouri River Relief through an organization called Sustain Mizzou. We did some camping and some cleanups. And by the time I was in my early 20s, was able to travel with the group to Omaha and St. Joseph and St. Louis and all these amazing places, and kind of seeing the idyllic beauty of the river and the towns in the river kind of from a different perspective that most people would never see. And it was really the people who connected me to the Missouri River that made me fall in love with it. And I was very happy to move to Jefferson City, where I'm a stone's throw away. And then I started the New Territory because I knew that there were all of these communities in the lower Midwest that had stories to tell. I'd hear about them as we traveled as a river crew, and I'd meet these inspiring people and wanted to collect them in a periodical magazine that could keep the conversation going about communities. And I think that's something that Janet also saw and also does and has done all your career as a producer. And you had this notion of a river town. Can we dig into that notion and what might that look like? And I enthusiastically responded, oh my gosh, yes, that's definitely a thing. So that's how we got connected. And I think
Well,
you tossed around the idea of a podcast.
Yeah, and I should throw out there that we were reading the New Territory. So we had the New Territory at the newsroom and at KPIA. And some of my colleagues were doing the same thing I was doing, which was just paying attention to this really special publication that was trying to sort of redefine how we see ourselves and what is the lower Midwest and culture and ideas and nature and reporting and journalism. Such an incredible mix. So we were watching, and yeah, so we were kind of had our eye on Tina. We knew that she was an alum and she was one of us, Mizzou family. So all of this was kind of fertile ground, I think, when we kind of ended up with a possibility to do a podcast. So we can get into that a little bit.
Janet, what is a podcast?
Oh, what is a podcast? We should say first. So a podcast, many of you have listened to podcasts and you know, but we still thought this is an interesting question to make even me explore. You know, we listen to the radio, and so much of media has been traditionally audio has been blasting out over the airwaves live, right? Watching the clock. And we still do that, of course, and we still do even talk shows live as they're happening, just talking on mics. Podcasts are taking those audio, taking the production and putting it on another platform, which you all are finding, putting it on a platform, and it's on demand. So it's whenever you want to listen to it. It's on, wherever you get your podcasts, including just going to the website and streaming, which is what I say to a lot of people who've never had podcasts and ask me this question. Tina and Steve kind of laughed when Tina asked that question, because I have done an entire talks with like the Jane Austen Society and podcasters where people will come up and say, you never said, what is a podcast? So I just wanted to make sure and talk about what a podcast is, but you all know what that is. But I will say that it's kind of interesting that it's really from the production viewpoint, it's really changed what we can do. Podcasts have really opened up. We wouldn't be able to send crews of student producers and reporters and collaborators and experiment in this community collaborative project for something that was going to go on the air. There's just not enough real estate on the clock. There's just not enough hours on the day for the clock. So it's kind of taken us off the clock with programming and with experimenting and with these projects. But then they go back on the air. So Rivertown has aired for an entire week. We aired 4-minute Rivertown episodes, thanks to our incredible editor. So it's just opened up experimentation, collaboration, and community audio in interesting ways. And so, 10 years ago, it would have been hard to think of a Rivertown. But now with podcasts happening, and I will just segue into the way this particular podcast got made, was that the people who've created podcasts, really whatever podcast you're listening to, even if you don't think it has anything to do with public radio, like The Daily with the New York Times or a lot of the print journalism podcasts, a lot of those podcasts are produced by public radio producers. And the podcasting, I like to say the podcasting overlords of public radio are a group called PRX. They knew about Missouri School of Journalism and they knew about KBIA. They knew about our student producers, and they said, you all should be part of our podcast incubator. And honestly, I felt like I didn't have time and we already had enough podcasts. And is there a reason why we should do this? And I just thought if we are going to do something, we're going to take the time to do something like this, because podcasts, I have to say, are a lot of work. It's a lot of work and it's expensive, one or the other or both. And I thought we just need to do something that our community really, really will love. Just a love story to our community and to nature. And we really need to make it have an impact and make it matter. And if it could provide an opportunity to work with someone like Tina and the New Territory, all the better. So that opportunity kind of came along, and that's where we started looking around and thinking, Tina, do you want to do this? And is it worthwhile?
The answer was yes. And then fast forward to Janet went ahead and took that yes, applied to the mothership of podcasting, PRX, for a regional journalism. I don't know if it's an experiment, but they were looking at 3 different regions across the nation, getting mostly public radio groups together to produce podcasts specific to their communities, which just as a journalist, I think that's really interesting that it was the Knight Foundation was interested in investing in regional journalism, which as a person doing regional journalism, I don't see a ton of. So that was inspiring in itself. So what follows is the pitch deck that we created from that like 2 years ago. And mind you, Rivertown just came out this year or 2024. So so it's this is mostly the early phase, the behind the scenes, because we went to PRX with this idea for a Rivertown podcast. The lost identity of Rivertowns was part of the notion. We had to define where the Missouri River was and kind of the aesthetics that we wanted. And Brian Haynes, love him. He, of course, said yes whenever we asked if we could use some of his imagery to illustrate what we were going for. But our original notion was this: Rivertown, a journey. You'll hear the Missouri River, its creatures, human and beyond human, and its cultures that are shaped and sustained by the river. You'll hear different voices, accents, and ranges of emotion responding to the river's powerful current and potential for quiet reflection. Importantly, you'll learn how to harmonize with different people using a shared landmark as common ground. So that's what we were going for. Pretty noble idea. All right. Oh yeah. And then, so this was for our podcast pitch. We said it would be an interview blended with an audio postcard. We were thinking maybe 30 to 45 minutes, and an immersive Missouri River field guide was the vibe. And then PRX said, cool idea, go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. They tend to say, whatever you think your idea is, it's not good enough. Like you don't know if it's a good idea until you go out and talk to people. But more importantly, and this is really important, until you go out and listen to people, go listen to people and really actively listen. And they have very interesting, I'm going to say kind of tech design oriented ways that you listen to people to design something. So yeah, that's what we started doing.
Well, and so this photo is from when we were at our podcast training, and we were identifying every kind of person or community that could be connected to the Missouri River. I'm talking like engineers, naturalists, race coordinators, people who are into like Wicca and pagan practices, really just anybody, educators, the list goes on. So that's what all of these are. And then we started kind of clustering, trying to figure out who it was we were trying to target. So then we started doing interviews with some people that I'm sure you will recognize. And we did these deep interviews, and then Janet and I went back to our sticky notes and tried to get an idea of who this person is and what it is they need. So things that make them happy, things that give them pain of some sort, and where their heart really is. So we interviewed Steve Schnarr. Did you know that we analyzed you to this degree?
It's gonna freak me out that you're gonna share that with
me. Okay. Steve in no way agreed to have all of his comments on a big screen. So it was really kind of an off the record interview, but nevertheless, it's all really brilliant stuff. And I will say, after sitting and listening to Steve and just taking notes, and they shared, we won't get into the details, we can share if anybody's interested, but they actually gave us training on how to take notes. They're giving journalists training on how to listen. It's something that we do all the time. But this was a very different way of listening and an active, and we're paying attention to different things. But the thing that I really came away with from listening to Steve was, I really thought, this is kind of funny, I thought Steve and a lot of you in this room would be like, I am into nature, I'm into the river, and I really don't like people, even though I knew Steve was a really people person and an organizer and a really nice guy. I really thought that he would be kind of impatient with the whole idea. And it was 180 degrees the other way around. It was, for me, the river is all about people. I was introduced to the river, and my whole life, I hope you don't mind me saying this, my whole life is about doing what was done to me, doing that for someone else. And so that really empowered me as a producer. And it's something that happens occasionally, that you suddenly feel like, oh, what is just needed here, what is exactly needed is a microphone to talk to people and to bring out these stories. That is what's needed and what's wanted. A lot of the time you feel like you're really, really extra and you're actually intrusive and not contributing much. And you're extracting from people. But that was one of the beautiful times in my work where someone said, no, like really sharing this with people is what you can do. When you have a microphone and you go somewhere, you can take people with you. And that just kind of does what Steve wants to do, magnified by tens of thousands of listeners. So it's just something that a microphone can provide, which is powerful. So it was very empowering to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, so Steve graciously sat down with us for over an hour. Same for Chris Kennedy. He's now the director of, well, the equivalent of the director of conservation in Kansas. Had been a long time freshwater biologist down in the Cape Girardeau area. Shubha Gautam was a 17-year-old at the time, high school student at Rockbridge, who had been a student of mine. We interviewed her. I knew she loved to go to the river kind of as stress relief and find some balance. And then we also interviewed Gloria Toon, so some of you know as a wonderful musician from Washington or the Washington area. And he's not pictured here, but Scott Swafford also sat down with us. So we were just gathering these different perspectives from people, and we landed on our point of view that we wanted to make this podcast for. That's something that PRX invited us to do, is to visualize one single real life person, maybe tempered by these other people you talk to. But who is going to be the most delighted by this? Everyone's invited to the party, but who are you throwing the party for? And we decided to throw it for Gloria because she's just sparkling, curious, really interested in art and artistic applications in her creative work as well as her professional work. So we identified the things that would make her happy. And we basically turned this portion about Gloria back around to the students who were working in Janet's class. And then we also said, we also want to make sure that we are looking at Indigenous perspectives of the river and some of these guiding principles that these are beautiful quotes. Do you mind if I read them? Okay. Christopher Kennedy said, in this day and age, we need to take a deep breath and try to understand one another. The river is an awesome place to do that. Steve Schnarr from Missouri River Relief said the Missouri River is a venue that brings people together in sane, relevant conversation. And then Shubha Gautam said, going out in nature is a good way to relieve stress. It's a way to slow down. So this was some more guiding principles that we equipped our student reporters with. And then we kind of threw out some ideas for potential episode threads. And some of them we got into and some of them we didn't, but I think we did hit most of these.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And then just a little more like looking at some of the podcasts that inspired us, even just some different media that inspired us, or like the kind of topics we wanted to really dig into. And then we went ahead and made a podcast. Do you want to listen to some of those podcasts first? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
While Tina's queuing that up, I'll talk while you're doing that, Tina. Yeah. It's interesting, the PRX experts, the podcasting experts said to us, and for those of you who do creative things, some of you may have already encountered this kind of thinking, but they said, who is your podcast for? And you can't say everybody. You know, obviously the cool thing about a podcast is that anybody can access it. Obviously, we want to be inclusive. We want to include everyone in a podcast, but they really, again, their design thinking was you can include everybody, but you really need to be focused on someone who just really encompasses just all the philosophies, all the needs, all the joy, all the things that you're really wanting to talk about in one person. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that. It was just kind of an interesting, creative method that I think can be applied to a lot of things when you're looking for an audience. We have a clip.
What they didn't tell us was to make your point of view person and like put them in the podcast, but we did that. And so that's what we're doing for
Yes.
this first clip, which is about 3 minutes. And the topic is the 1993 flood. So the first voice you'll hear is Gloria, and then the second voice you'll hear, or the second person being interviewed, who's not this voice that you're hearing right now, which is me. That's Christina Holzhauser, who's a writer here in Columbia. In 1993, the Missouri River flooded 100,000 homes, including the old Nona General Store. We can't talk about the Missouri River without talking about this flood. It's the kind of event people still talk about in terms of before and after. You can put numbers on the flood, like how it caused around $15 billion in damage, or kept cities or towns underwater for up to 200 days in some parts of the Mississippi. But it's the way people talk about the Great Flood that really gets me. I hear reverence and awe and exhaustion. Michael's studio on the first level was completely underwater for 100 days. Gloria says the family got closer to the community during the flood's slow unfolding.
It doesn't just come, flooding in like a flash flood would. It kind of comes in. So you have a lot of warning. And there are a lot of people, the volunteer firefighters and a lot of people, the levee district, all those people know when it's time to get out of the house. So we were really lucky that it was in that situation so that we could really prepare, pack everything up, move everything up to the second floor so it wouldn't get destroyed. And we had lots of help.
It was just wild. Just to have nature inside your home seems like it's just so disorienting.
Christina Holzhauser was only 13 years old when the flood came to her small town of Portland, Missouri.
Flood water, that smell is very distinctive to me. I can smell anywhere and be like, it's flooded here recently. It's almost like decomposition, but sweeter and also sour at the same time. It's like a sour sweetness.
Today, Christina's creative nonfiction writing centers around her identity and growing up in her small town. She remembers scenes from the flood in vivid detail, like seeing her neighbors drive boats to work, or begging her parents to let her swim with the neighborhood kids in a big pond of dirty flood water.
And it was so muddy that when I came out, there was just a layer of silt on my body. It was disgusting. And then I smelled like flood, like I became a flood monster. Maybe I learned my mortality then, or I learned to be a little bit more afraid of natural disasters. The river is part of us, but it also controls us. I feel like river people really respect the river, and they know to be afraid of it because it can totally change your landscape. I mean, it's just a real reminder that things can change really quickly, and things you know or that are familiar can just vanish.
All right, so that concludes that little bit. Actually, though, it just occurred to me, episode 1 is titled A Flood Monster, Music, and a Pretzel Boat. And the pretzel boat was former Big Muddy Speaker Series feature artist Steve Snell. And that's how I found out about him. And that's how he came into the podcast. So if you'll bear with me, I'll try to find just a clip. I don't know. I did not write down the timing, but I know it's about here. Let's see if we can hear from Steve. On here, yeah, please. Art on the Mighty Mo is a lot like Bob Ross meets Survivor. Steve's made hundreds of watercolor paintings, most of them with actual Missouri River water. They capture the serene, still beauty of the river. Some of them show gorgeous big bluffs, others just water, sky, and gentle banks. But Steve also took tons of video footage. He documented basically every day he was on the river. He's been editing the video down into episodes with narratives about his trip.
Previously on the Mighty Mo, I depart the Missouri River headwaters on June 2nd in search of adventure and art. Morale remains high despite my fear of a nearby fugitive. I meet a puppy that will later be named Steve and become windbound on Upper Lake Hauser. I make it to the gates of the mountains wilderness and take the time to paint.
And while he's got lots more video to work through, Steve's already planning his next big float trip, which brings a new twist to paddling.
What I want to do is build a pretzel shaped boat, and I want to float it from Kansas City to St. Louis. And rather than it being like a solo adventure, just by myself, I want to like put together a whole kind of rendezvous of folks to join me in like celebrating the Missouri River through this spectacle of a group float on a giant pretzel across the state. Well, I love snacks, and that's why a pretzel. To see a giant pretzel float by your riverfront would garner some attention.
All right. So we'll skip the other one I was going to share, but that just delighted me. I hope it delighted you too. So let's see. Aha, gotta use the clicker.
Part two.
Yes. So you hear my voice in this podcast a lot. I did no interviews. That was not me. So this was all brilliantly edited and cut together through the work of the reporters, Tadeo Ruiz, Eileen Lee, Ellie Lynn, Kaylin Hellier, Olivia Mizell, and Kiana Fernandez. And then they were managed by the brilliant Jessica Von Martin, and the whole thing was edited by Abigail Keel, who is also a fellow Mizzou School of Journalism graduate, and helmed by the fearless Janet Saidi, who had them in class and then also was available to answer their questions and manage their files and do all the things. So this was an amazing group project that went really well. So do you want to talk more about the making of? And
oh my goodness.
team?
So it was really only the second podcast the second narrative podcast we've done, and nothing had been that ambitious. This podcast obviously involved going out on the river, which I envisioned Tina and me going out a lot on the river and doing it ourselves, but we did have a really big student team available to do it. Also, the news director of KBIA left suddenly, so I found myself interim news director, so I really couldn't do a podcast. So we were able to bring in some of these other producers, which was a real gem. It just worked out so well because, like Tina said, the whole project and the students already had me. And then for them to now also have these other special producers. Abby Keel lives in Brooklyn. I love saying that. She's like a Brooklyn podcaster, which just sounds like something that should be on Netflix and not even a real thing. But she is, and she was our editor. She brought so much to the project. She's a Missourian. She loves Missouri. She loves the Missouri River. So it was really the best of both worlds coming together. And then, of course, Tina. And I said to Tina, like every time Tina walked into the newsroom, just the energy just went way up. Same with Jessica. It's a really, really wonderful collaboration. So it was very, very special for that. But an army of student producers, and some of them had never really done long form. And that is kind of the beauty of what happens over there in our newsroom is we just have these templates, we have these things, and people follow them. The difference with this is that the student producers were creating the template. It worked out so well because I don't know, they learned the rules and then they figured out how to break the rules. And especially one producer, I'll just shout out. I don't think that he'll be embarrassed, which is Tadeo, because Tadeo is a producer who's here with us. So he can help answer questions that you might have for somebody who is like actually out on the river. Tadeo was actually out on the river with Chris Kennedy, who's just an incredible voice and figure. Every time he speaks, something poetic comes out. And so we knew we just really wanted to go in depth with Chris Kennedy, and Tadeo was the perfect person to do that. And then if you listen to episode 5, Tadeo broke all the rules, learned the rules, and then broke them by just doing a first person point of view. Like, I grew up in Mexico City afraid of the river. Sorry, I'm telling your story today, but why would anyone want to live by the river? And so exploring that question, which many of you have heard, just became such a great episode in itself that we just changed all of our processes for that last episode to make it really Tadeo's story. So just really creative people with the army of students. What am I missing?
I am just amazed that we gave them this idea
Mhm,
exactly what
mhm.
we just showed you. Like, oh, here's the person we're making for, here's the stuff they would like, here's some ideas for episodes or where to go. And they brought that back and then so much more. I was finding myself learning new things as I'm like reading the script for what I should say as the host of this podcast. And I think that was something really beautiful about it, because I think most of these people were not from this area. And so they brought in a really fresh perspective as students at MU who had only been around for a few years and who had been very busy with school, but also very curious and very excited to get out and to see new things. That was really inspiring to me too, because I'll be honest, a little part of me is like still wants to be, the very smart, gifted kid who knows everything already about the river. And I was like self-conscious that all my river friends were going to be like, well, Tina, that's really basic what you're making. And like, by the end, I was just like, just so delighted that I knew they were bringing back new material. And especially today's episode is my favorite episode. It's very new territory in the sense that it's like a personal story mixed with telling the story about a place, which is Rocheport. So yeah, we didn't even give them places really. We kind of gave them ideas and then they found the towns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything about hosting? Tina was an amazing host, and that was another thing that was kind of iterative, but the podcast, I had a sense that Tina would be a great host, but I'm not an expert in the talent side, but the PRX people also backed me up on that. They're like, Tina, you need to host it.
I resisted.
It was still it was voluntary and it was a lot of time. But because we could have done something else, but I think it worked out so incredibly well. But not only are you hearing Tina's voice, you're also hearing Tina's writing. A lot of talking on the radio is writing. And this is something I always remind our students of. They don't realize, because even we forget that we're writers. So much of what you hear on the radio and on audio and on podcasts, especially good podcasts, is written, but kind of voiced as if you are voicing it as naturally as possible. Tina just nailed that. I mean, I've done this for years. Tina nailed that, writing and then reading as if you're not writing. So that's what you hear with the host. But it was a lot of work to edit these long stories that student producers had a stab at a script, never having written a script before. And our editor was amazing too. So I was super grateful for this talented group of producers.
Yeah. And there's a particular challenges with like taking a mic onto a boat on the river too, that somehow Abigail worked through. So
yes,
yeah.
what Missouri River Relief calls river air conditioning.
Yes.
We caught river air conditioning, which is basically when the kids are out on the boat, we speed it up.
So sorry. Okay, there we go.
Should we listen?
Yeah, let's listen. We got 4 more minutes. Sound good? Okay, here we go. This is from episode 2. In October, the annual Race to the Dome takes place as a fundraiser for the nonprofit Missouri River Relief. It's like a 5K benefit, but in boats. Paddlers start in one of 2 access points upriver, depending on if they want to paddle 16 miles or 28 miles. They end up across the river from Jefferson City, the state capital. That's why it's named Race to the Dome, for our state capitol building, which is in view of the finish line. Before the race, Christy Kurtz is hanging out with her kayak on the riverbank near Hartsburg. She's the founder of a paddling club called Paddle KC. She and about 14 other members of the group are participating in the race this year.
Some of us are doing it as a race. Some of us are just doing it for fun. Me. It's really cool to see a lot of our paddlers start as fairly new paddlers, and then they build up the skills and the confidence to do this race. The Race to the Dome, we've got people here who've never been on a race ever. Oh. So this is their first race, and it's a lot of fun. We race down the river, and then at the end, they have a big celebration with the awards for those people who are doing it for time. And we hear about updates with Missouri River Relief, and they're a fabulous organization.
Missouri River Relief is a nonprofit organization dedicated to exploration, enjoyment, restoration, and care of the river. Proceeds from today's registrations and sponsorships will go toward their work educating people about the Missouri River.
Christy is thrilled to be able to support an organization she admires while doing something she loves so much. For her, paddling isn't just exercise, it's a whole lifestyle.
I like being close to the water. I like the feel of, moving on the water. I like the sound. I like seeing all the cool wildlife, the birds, the snakes, the fish. We see amazing things that you will never see when you're hiking. I love hiking too, and I've done backpacking, all those things. But there's just something about the water, especially like first thing in the morning when the sun's coming up and the fog's out there, or sunsets. We do a lot of sunset paddles. It's peaceful, it's fun, it's beautiful, and you see stuff you'd never see otherwise. And you meet the coolest people. I mean, you look around this place and you think, where else would I meet this wild assortment of people?
She's right. The launch is bustling with all kinds of people. Athletes in tights and sunglasses. Parents and grandparents with their kids wrapped in blankets. As things gear up for the race to begin, racers pack up their water and snacks and pose for photos. There's probably 100 people milling about.
All right, everybody, if you want to gather up here, we'll get our safety talk going.
Then River Relief's Dave Combs gives the paddlers a safety brief.
Welcome to the 14th annual Race to the Dome. We're going to go over some general safety information for you guys.
People are launching their boats into the water. There are canoes and kayaks for 1 or 2 people and stand-up paddleboards. Some years, there's a dragon boat that holds more than a dozen racers. And one year, my brother-in-law played his cello at the front of the canoe that my husband paddled. To see all this color in the Big Muddy is a beautiful sight.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And they're off.
Ooh. All right. And we're off.
And we're off. Yeah, and we're almost done. Cool. So I think I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing with the Rivertown project in print, and we'll finish on just how to find the Rivertown podcast if you haven't already, or if you want to give it another listen now that you know like how the sausage is made. So I'm very excited because in the next print issue of the magazine, issue 17, we will have about a 8 to 10 page spread of photos that were created by Columbia, Missourian photographers who were photojournalism students. And the editorial director was a graduate student named Caroline McCone. And we worked with, or we pulled photos from their projects from about 5 different locations. Jefferson City and Herman are here. I think there was Chamois and Glasgow and a farming family. And then somehow Westphalia ended up in the photo set, and we had already chosen the photos before we realized it was not from actually a Missouri river town, but that's okay because the Marius River is beautiful too. So anyway, you get the sneak preview. This is the cover of issue 17. Nobody else has seen this before. So it is of a comet over the Missouri River. Ooh. A guy from Instagram who works for maybe the DNR, whose name is escaping me, but it'll be in the print issue. You should subscribe, and then you can look on the inside cover and see who this brilliant photographer is. And you can subscribe to the New Territory on shop.newterritorymag.com. But that's not why you're here today. We're here to talk about Rivertown. Janet, how can they find it?
But that is such a great point that you made that I hadn't mentioned yet, but when I said there was an army of producers and a lot of them were audio, but we actually widened out the invitation to what we call the Missouri News Network, which is Missourian photographers and just incredibly talented group of photographers. And the director of photography, Brian Kratzer, has a real heart for rural stories and river stories. Jackie Bell is another photography and video professor, and the students really signed up for this project. They loved it. And I think that's the reason we'll try to do this project again. That it was a massive group of students, photography, video, and audio kind of out front, but a lot of students sweeping up just incredible, beautiful storytelling. And what was I supposed to say?
Oh, just where can they find the
You can
Rivertown
go to
podcast?
kbia.org. Also, there's a flyer there for Rivertown if you want to take it with you. It's got a QR code, so you can just put it on your phone. You can literally, a lot of you have listened, but you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also just go to kbia.org and stream it. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you all. All right. Well, we're happy to take questions if you have any.
Yes, and I'm gonna try to get these mics to work. Can you hear me okay? Is that good? Okay.
Do you want to test
So
yours?
Kevin and I have mics and we'll come to you and retrieve your questions so the internet can hear them as well. Rob's always good for a question.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I think I've listened to every episode. I might have missed one or two, but I really enjoyed it. What you've presented here today really emphasizes people having fun on the river and enjoying the beauty of the river and the poetry. I've also interacted with people who are very angry, and there's a lot of controversy on the river, a lot of contentiousness. Did you avoid those issues on purpose?
It was intentionally optimistic.
I think that what we were drawing from is and I think what you just mentioned, it's such a great question. It's something I was going to try to be sure to talk about is that, even when we started Rivertown, and it's only gotten worse, we're in a very divisive situation, a very divisive society, and people are not finding as many ways of connecting. And we just knew, and I increasingly find that when you find people in real life getting together, that's the way actually to even explore the difficult issues. So I was not averse at all to exploring difficult issues on the river. And I think we did that to an extent. It's just that you find people that are finding solutions on the river. Chris Kennedy's really, really good on this. You've probably heard him talk about this. But he's seen it all on the river, and he's experienced all kinds of things in society and life. Those are the people who are in that lane of like, let's see what the solution is. Let's get together. Let's spend time together. And the river, to quote him, the river connects us. It connects our histories. It reminds us of our shared histories. That's something that's really important right now. But I think that is the way into the really difficult issues. So that's a good question. We could do more investigative because Tina and the Missourian crews, there are a lot of people that can do investigative reporting. So I think this is the way to do it.
Yeah, there were some controversial towns that maybe are seeing some development that locals aren't as happy about, that we considered, should we make the whole podcast just focused in on that? But in the end, I think searching for that common ground and for ways to talk with people that, I don't know. It was lighter though. It definitely is lighter. And I think that was intentional because I think we were keeping Gloria in mind. Not that she's averse to difficult issues, but I think she also tries to see the bright side of everything.
Yeah, thank you. A follow-on, which is actually more of a non sequitur about what is a podcast. Does that all go back to the iPod? Is that where pod comes from, or did it start before that?
Yes, it comes from the iPod.
I'm just gonna hop in with a question. First of all, I totally loved the Rivertown podcast, and I'm gonna listen to it over and over again. It was so fun, so well done. And I was wondering, you've sort of alluded to maybe what happens next, and I was just kind of wondering. I know that there's one episode that's been done. I don't know if it's finished, but is there another season, or what are you kind of waiting on to figure that out?
We were just talking about it today. We feel like the template is created, this thing is created. It's much easier to do a second season. And I feel like the momentum is there, even more so for reasons we were just getting at. I think people are really wanting that. And I think we can go deeper, like you're saying. We can go deeper into the stories. So we would like to do it again. It's expensive. We could use money, but we were just trying to figure out the very least we could do for it. So we are seeking funding, but even there's a lot of momentum and there's a lot of interest, and a lot of our, I would say our leadership would like to see it and is supportive of that as well. So that helps. And so I think we'll, stay tuned. And if anybody has any ideas, or if you are connected to organizations that may want to help support it as sponsors, if it coincides with anyone's marketing efforts, as our PRX advisor says, get in touch. We can put you in touch with the money people. But I know that the students and I and Tina and the staff and our teams would love to just kind of really make it available as an opportunity for students again as well. So,
yeah.
I'm curious as to maybe your demographics of your listeners. Have you been able to do any kind of research on that? Are you guys connecting with brand new people, or are you just kind of getting the same old river rats, do you think?
I think we were definitely getting new people, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, that the whole back end of any audio world, I don't know too much about, but yeah.
It's been a while since I looked into that, and I wasn't really looking at whether people had been on the river or not. We were looking at the demographics we were looking at is like, how did you find the podcast and things like that that are relevant in our world, but that would be interesting to look at. How many listeners? Oh gosh, what did I tell you a while ago?
I feel like the first episode was like 700 or something, and then it went down from there, like to 400 or 300, and then like 150. Like it tapers. Like people listen to the first episode.
That's really hard to count as well, because so many people are just streaming it on KBIA. Some people are catching it on the radio, and then people who are listening to the podcast are listening to it in various different formats. So we did pull out all that together. And thank you for the reminder. I think it was hundreds, and I think getting into thousands of downloads and listeners. Yeah, it did well. It did among our better podcasts.
Real quick one right here. One thing I really liked about all the episodes was sort of the music underneath everything. Could you talk about the decision, one, to whether or not you were going to include music to the extent that you guys did, and how you went about doing that and deciding when to and what kind?
Yeah, we created an initial mock-up. A lot of the music was our editor, Abigail Keel from Brooklyn, who has excellent tastes and knows how to do music on a podcast. And Gloria Atun, again, as a musician, was a huge inspiration. So I think her music sounds really, really good. It's in one particular episode and maybe more. And I think it kind of came from that. I think that was in a little bit of our, Tina and me did mock-ups, and it was in that. And the PRX people helped us with that. So we had a little bit of a template, and then Abigail just like made it soar. Everything you heard today was Abigail, I think. Just choosing great tunes. Yeah.
Hello. I was one of the at least 700, and then I've also made it through episode 3 so far. Really liking it, and hope to continue.
Thank you.
Also, for when the current set of episodes wraps, or when I finish listening, what should folks listen to next? What other sources of inspiration or stuff within the genre have you all found?
Yeah, well, so it's not a local one, but it in content and approach is similar, that we really loved and inspired us as a podcast called Rumble Strip, and it's out of Vermont. Have you heard that? Okay, it's really great. It shows up earlier. We'll get to it. So yeah, it looks like this.
Those 4.
Rumble Strip.
Yeah.
So it's very intimate. I feel like this woman has interviewed every person who lives in Vermont. And she'll do longer stories about a single person, or she'll pick an issue that's maybe controversial. They have a lot of people moving in from out of state into Vermont, and that makes some people mad. She'll dig into that. She'll also do these mini series
The one recent one that I thought was amazing was titled, "What class are you?" And she would just show up with a microphone to somebody and ask them that question and record whatever they said. And it's just this amazing impressionistic look at a particular place, told by a person who loves Vermont dearly. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, I loved that. Tina introduced me to that one, and it's beautiful. The two, A People's History and Hungry for Mo, are Kansas City, and our colleagues are great. They're wonderful people, and those are really great award-winning podcasts. You could go to, if you're looking for really nicely produced podcasts, you can go to PRX and just see what they distribute, and it's a real range. Also, This American Life. I mean, they transformed the way we do journalism and the way we talk on the radio and write. And they don't do anything like Rivertown, really, I think I can say.
Yeah.
They haven't got that good yet. But This American Life is legendary. You probably all already hear it. But I still introduce it to students. And when I circle back and say, what are you all listening to? What should I be listening to? They tell me This American Life, which always just kills me. I just think it's so funny.
I guess to kind of follow up on that a little bit, what came first, the idea for a podcast or the idea that it should be focused on the river or this River Towns concept, or like how did that initial seed grow?
I think hearing our students come back with audio from the river, students came back with audio of Chris Kennedy talking about how the river connects us. They came back with someone finding a refrigerator in the river, and just the community that was congregating around the river. And then also I knew I have friends, and many of you are like them, that they make life decisions based on the river. I had friends who moved one place and they're in a band. So I knew music and culture was a big part of this. And they said, well, of course we'll live by the river. Like, we don't know where we'll live, but it'll be in a river town. And I think that was really influential to me, because I just felt like as a producer, I wanted to know what is it that is motivating you all? And can I bottle that up and broadcast it and share it with everybody? Can we all learn something by going with you to that? So I would say, Steve, the answer is it was about the river. It was about the community, but we're audio. I'm an audio producer, and audio as a medium, we haven't really said this, audio as a medium does really have an ability to take you places that other, media cannot do. There's something about the experience of audio. You're engaging with it. You're still imagining. You're using so much of your brain with it, that audio is really kind of magic in that way. So it's the magical log ride adventure.
Yeah, and I have to say, it would not have happened without Janet's great idea and enthusiasm for this subject of the river. And you could do any medium. You could be making watercolors about the river or pretzel boats or whatever. I would follow you into a volcano, whatever you wanted to do. About the river. And it's just been really inspiring to work with a great educator as well as audio producer extraordinaire. So
thank you, Tina. Right back at you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for this dynamic audio duo?
We got along really well.
Well, thank you both so much for
thank you guys. Thank you for listening too.
Thank you.